Hey there, everyone. Jim here with Fantasy for the Ages, the father of this father and son show. Zach and I get together and talk about fantasy, science fiction, and other nerdy things we enjoy. And sometimes we record separately. That's what I have for you today. Just Jim coming at you, a quick take all about Watchmen. If you enjoy this episode, be sure to let us know by clicking that like button down below. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet done so. There's a comment box here on YouTube. You can let us know what you're thinking about what we put out here today. We always respond. And down in the show notes, all the other ways that you can interact with my son Zach and I, our Discord server, social media, even our Patreon page. Thank you to those of you who are already Patreon supporters. If you don't support us yet, check patreon.com out for Fantasy for the Ages and see what other benefits come along to those who support us. I have no idea why it took me so long to get around to reading Watchmen, this comic series, almost kind of graphic novel that was written by Alan Moore with artist Dave Gibbons doing beautiful work. It was published by DC Comics over 12 issues way back in 1986 and 87. Now, thinking of those times, there are certainly a few reasons I didn't notice originally. I mean, that was freshman year of college for me. I was not into comic books at that time. Yeah, comics were fine, but they really weren't my thing. I mean, Star Trek: The Next Generation, yeah, that had just come out. Woo, that was awesome. MASH reruns were still a thing back in college. Monty Python and the Holy Grail, we would watch endlessly and recite everything along with it. I was playing a lot of disc golf back then, and I was into 80s slasher films. Yeah, esoteric, I know. Comics, I hadn't fit time for that in. Yeah, I was also going to class and doing a lot of studying. But the other thing is, when I did get into comics some years later, it was mostly Marvel comics. My brother, 5 years younger than me, he'd gotten all into comics while he was going through high school and then college, and he never quit. He still is a big comics fan. Once he was out adulting, married, we would get together, my family, his family, for Thanksgiving. And we still do this. We alternate who hosts, which is fantastic. And for many years, whether I was going to his place or he was coming to mine, a box of comics would leave his possession and come into mine for that year, where he let me, borrow all of those back issues, anything I hadn't read yet. And I read so many comics. And the way I love doing it, just binging month after month after month. Fantastic. But again, Marvel Comics was his thing, thus they became my thing that much more so. It wasn't exclusively Marvel. I mean, that's how I came upon The Walking Dead for the first time. He had those, and oh, that was great. He's the one that got me into Saga. So it's not all Marvel to this day, but Watchmen, they weren't there. DC Comics really wasn't much of what he was into. So Watchmen completely missed my attention until the movie adaptation came out in 2009. I didn't watch the movie at the time, but the previews looked excellent. I thought I'd enjoy it. I missed the movie primarily because that was a really tough year economically here in the United States. And going to movies was not what I was spending my money on. Plus, I realized it was an adaptation of a comic series that I had never read. And if you've watched us before, you know I always want to see the source material before I watch an adaptation of it. So I figured I'd read Watchmen someday and then check the movie out. Well, somehow I blinked, and it's 14 years later when that day finally came. I read the 12-issue Watchmen run just recently, and then immediately the next day followed it up with a watch of Zack Snyder's film adaptation, which is available currently on Max, which I do have a subscription to. I gotta say, genuinely, I am sorry I waited this long, as this thing was freaking awesome on so many levels. First off, the comic series is strikingly well written and beautifully brought to the page. The depth and complexity of the plot's incredible. And it's shocking how much Alan Moore was able to pack into just a 12-issue run. It has so much to say about politics, about society, about fear, just about humanity and the human condition. And it does this through a storyline that sucks you in. And nuanced storyline. It's not just linear. The way he jumps back and forth between times and even has a subplot with the pirate story. I mean, mind-blowing what he came up with to write. There are multiple amazing characters in this series. I'm not going into deep plot things because, as usual, I'm doing this spoiler light, but for those who have watched it, there are certainly some characters that really stood out for me, ones I really got hooked on. My highlights would be Rorschach, Adrian, and Dr. Manhattan. And let's give a shout out to the comedian for being nearly right up there with the rest of them. Even though this was written in the late 80s, I found the plot to feel just as fresh and applicable today. Having lived the history that it's built into, even though it's an alternate history, that gives it a little more meaning for me than it might for younger readers. But still, the themes are extremely relevant nowadays, perhaps even more so. I would certainly recommend this to anyone who has not read it, even if you haven't been a comic reader before. That said, I also was blown away by the movie adaptation. It's practically a frame for frame adaptation. Only one significant change is made towards the end, but it doesn't change the purpose of the plot. In some ways, it actually makes the final point even more strongly. I imagine the change was done for cost. Thinking of what they did in the comics and trying to port that to the screen, that would have been significantly more expensive than what they did. But don't get me wrong, they did not skimp on the production of this movie. The effects are incredible. There's so much that they had to CGI into this thing. They spent about 135 million producing this film, and it didn't initially earn much more than that in the box office. I mean, it did get its money back and make a little more, but they were kind of disappointed at first. But when it went into the home media market, oh, it's made them gobs of money. So definitely considered a commercial success. Now, I tend to be critical of movies and shows that make significant departures from the source material. And I hear from people, oh, it's an adaptation. You just got to let it go. They can't do everything straight from the page to the screen. Nobody would want that. This movie says crap to that because they gave us exactly what we wanted, the comics, brought to life brilliantly, cinematically. Maybe it was done so well because it's written so well, it's designed so well, and it's already in comic form, not like novel. That might have made it easier, but they certainly could have made more changes with the adaptation if they'd wanted to. They didn't want to. And therefore, people who love the comics, yeah, they're going to love this movie. I do think that a person best appreciates the movie if they've read the comic series first, as the written material comes with extra documents at the end of the first 11 of the 12 issues that I did take the time to read. It's not filler stuff. You want to read it. A few pages of material that adds extra layers and lots of background to the story. And they use that in the movie. They slip little pieces from that in really well scripted ways, but it's easy to miss what they're trying to say there. So you definitely want to pay attention to those when you read the comics, and the movie will be richer because of it. Never read or watched this? Fix that. Go watch The Watchmen, but read it first. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll talk to you next time.